my name is Laura, and I'm the COO of BuildZig, and my educational background is I'm an attorney, and I worked as a land use attorney working for a city before going into private practice, where I'm the general counsel for our development company and also the COO. And in the course of working in different phases of development, my expertise is in helping projects get planning approval and navigating when projects hit kind of complicated planning decisions or building department decisions. As a company, one of our Carlos and I have done our own projects, which makes us a bit different than a lot of other contractors or other kind of design vendors. So we understand the pain of change orders or at a personal level. And so our focus really in helping consumers and folks is trying to make things as simple as possible and taking out as much uncertainty as possible as you go through the development process. Since that we have had our own projects where uncertainty has caused us to have to figure out how to be creative and navigate different city processes. And I'll kick it over to Carlos.
Thank you, Laura. So my name is Carlos Plazola. I'm the CEO and one of the owners of BuildZig Development Services. We do one-stop shop development service support to consumers. We've been doing that for about 10 years. And that starts everywhere from assessing a site to helping get the planning approvals, to get building approvals, building permit issued, getting bids for owners, and then managing the contractors. We're also licensed general contractors, our company is, and we've built about 50 projects throughout the state of California in the last 10 years or so. And have a good amount of experience, particularly with smaller projects, including ADUs and home additions. Yeah, I'm here to share with you some of the cost assessments, some of the cost assumptions you should make, and also how long things would take from start to finish if you sought to pursue an ADU on your property.
All right. So I think next on the agenda, we'll push into a bit of a cost presentation from Carlos on the wide range of cost options.
Hi, so I've put together a flyer here, and I would appreciate people's, as I'm presenting, please stay or become familiar with your chat button down at the bottom here. If you click that, you'll see a Zoom group chat. Very much appreciate if you could send comments that I could learn from and grow from. What do you appreciate about the presentation I'm about to do? What questions do you have that perhaps next time I can answer as part of the presentation or after I complete the presentation? So please give me your feedback, and I invite everybody to do that. So I'm going to share a document, which is what's great about Zoom, is the ease with which we can share information with each other. I'll start by saying that ADUs come in all shapes and sizes and different costs. There's no sort of rule about which ones are cheaper or more expensive, other than if it's prefabbed and easy to install, chances are it's going to be faster and easier, but key thing there is easy to install. Typically, if your topography is difficult, challenging, sloped, hard to access, the costs go up. If you have hillsides you're trying to build on, then you have difficulty with foundations, so costs will go up. If it's easy to access, then across the board it's going to go down in price. Yeah, so let me share this document with you. All right, if you can give me a thumbs up in the chat there if you're able to see it. Looks like I can't see the comments. Okay, well, I'll have to go back to that. But this is this document I put together to give people a sense of the options out there for ADUs, and I'm going to start at the top and just go through them all. So the first option, which is something that's in development, it's actually in development by our company BuildZig, which is a shipping container conversion to modern ADU. I'll zoom in a little bit here, but this is a sample of what it might look like. Typically they're 20 by 8, so 160 square feet, 20 feet long, 8 feet wide, 160 square feet, and the cost is about $300 a square foot to build, to purchase, design, purchase, build, install. And it's about $50,000 in cost, roughly. We're still building the prototype, and the monthly rent is you can get, and this is Oakland rent, so we're here based here in Oakland. This would change obviously according to where you are, and encourage you to do your own research on that. If we do a site assessment, we might be able to give you some information on that. The valuation, and this valuation is based on how much rent you'd be able to charge, minus expenses, and then some reasonable, what's called a cap rate. That's the valuation determinant. So about a $200,000 valuation if you're getting $1,500 a month rent. The net equity to you is about $170,000. That's how much the value is above cost. And then the time to design and install once the prototype is completed is about 4 months. So that's one of the beauties of this type of prefab. You'll see that with all the prefabs. They're all relatively fast to install. So this is about the least expensive, but most advantageous in terms of financial result. But obviously the design is constrained by the rectangle of the container. So that may not appeal to many people. Okay, then you look at conversions of garage to an ADU. And so this scenario has a garage that the city municipality has to sign off because the state says so. So you're allowed to create a living unit in there. And so if you have an existing foundation that is tested by your engineer and the engineer says, yes, that looks great. We accept your foundation for residential use, not just for parking a car, which in most cases it should be if you have a good solid slab. Then it's about $300 a square foot. I assume $500 square foot ADU. So the cost is about $150,000, and that's, I'm projecting that as an all-in cost of construction. There may be some additional fees like city impact fees. There may be some utility fees that go above this, but for the most part, this is a fair number. And let's say that because you have 500 square feet in Oakland, this would run about $2,000 to rent. Your valuation's higher. Your net equity is not quite as high as the shipping container, but $138,000 in net equity, and then 6 months to install. And that's to get approvals and install it. It's a fast installation because really you don't have to worry about the foundation or the walls. You're really just putting in all your finish items and your electrical, mechanical, and plumbing. And then a garage conversion. Now I'll go a little quicker through these. Garage conversion to ADU without an existing foundation. Now you have to put in, let's say you're a structural engineer, you have a dirt slab under your garage, or a dirt base in your garage, then you have to put in a new slab. So that'll cost you a bit more and it'll take you longer. So in this case, it might cost $400 a square foot. So you don't get as much equity. So here it reduces your equity, and it takes could take the same amount of time because it's not hard to pour a garage, but actually I probably should add a month or two to the timeline because pouring a slab might take a month to design it and install it extra. Basement conversion to an ADU with existing foundation. It's about the same cost as doing a conversion of a garage, again, because you have an existing foundation. So it's very similar in terms of your value increase to the garage. Only difference is time. It takes a little longer. Just typically you have to do a little bit more improvements to the basement than you might have to do to a garage. Might have to do some waterproofing, those kinds of things around the edges. So it might take a little longer. The basement conversion without an existing foundation, this one here is about comparable to a garage without an existing foundation. And it'll take a little longer because putting a slab and foundation into a basement is trickier than doing it in a garage because you're having to deal with moving the house, lifting the house sometimes, doing some underpinning, some foundation improvement work. So, and then now we get into outside of your existing building with prefab. So a new detached ADU using traditional prefab. is less expensive, $250 a square foot estimated. But it's, you can make them nice. So I included here that because they have their separate space, yard, you can charge a little bit more rent. And so your net equity goes up, and it's a pretty fast install. So all in all, even though your cost is a little higher than your shipping container approach, your cost is a little higher. Your net equity might be a little higher because you have a separate yard for this, and it's a little bit nicer. You can configure it the way you want to. Yeah, so, and then we get to detached ADU with a modern prefab modular. So the previous one was traditional, which really is not as attractive to people as the modern. But it is a little bit more expensive to build, a little bit more precise design, higher end features, so the construction costs can go up, but your rent will also go up, but it's more attractive to the eye. So you may choose this as an owner. If you want to really appreciate what you look at every day as an art piece, you can really find some beautiful modern prefab ADUs out there that will actually enhance the aesthetics of your yard and get you a nice return on investment. And then we get your detached ADU on-site build. And these are projects that it's not a prefab, you're not converting a garage, you're not adding to the basement. You're actually building it on site, and they tend to run a little higher, so at $300 to $450 range. The difference in these costs is that the difficulty in building. So you might have some ADUs that are very difficult to build because they're on a hillside, or it's very difficult to access the site on a tight cul-de-sac. There's nowhere to park your construction equipment, nowhere to store your materials. Your costs go up with all inefficiencies. So these might take 10 months to build. It takes a little longer to build what's called stick build in your yard. And you'll see that as long as it's an easy build, there's good equity. If it's not an easy build, then it really hurts your equity. So you still have positive return on your investment in terms of equity, but it'll just be more difficult to get it in there. So it'll drive the equity down. I have both of them at 10 months because there's not a huge difference in the amount of time it takes to put them in, but there might be another extra month for the difficult to build site, possibly another couple of months for difficult to build site, depending on the size of the ADU and just how difficult it is to build. So these are the options that are available to any homeowner depending on their situation. And we can help you assess which one of these is most appropriate for your site. Depending on what you value, what you want, and how much time you'd like to get it in, and how much money you have to spend. How was that? Let me close.
That's great. It's a really cool document. I think one of the questions we get all the time is around cost ranges, and so it's really cool to have a sample sheet like that that just gives people a ballpark of like where they're going to end up, depending on what kind of projects they're considering.
Excellent.
All right. Anybody got questions? Let's see. It's a quiet group. We'll start with some of the questions that got mailed in ahead of time, if that's okay. And they'll be on a range of topics, including construction, but also planning. And so, I think one of our subscribers wrote in with a two-parter. He asked, he's in Oakland, and he said that it looks to him like the city wants him to limit his ADU construction to 1,000 square feet, but he thought that now California can build 1,200 square foot ADUs. What should he do? Who should he talk to?
Yeah, so I'll field this call. When we emailed back and forth with this person, one of the things that had happened was that he just went on to the city's application and was kind of inferring what the lot size was based on the application. But some cities are kind of adjusting to the new laws that came into place in California, it wasn't clear that the city was restricting that versus streamlining certain types of ADUs because the actual ordinance hadn't been released yet. So my first comment back to that person was to communicate with the city to find out what their actual ordinance was, if there was an ordinance in place, before we find out whether or not there is some sort of unlawful restriction happening. My little plug will be that BuildZig does those site assessments, and in the process of doing those site assessments, we gather that information for you, and help you determine what is lawful in that jurisdiction. But since January 1st, 2020, local jurisdictions don't have a lot of discretion in terms of what they're allowed to authorize, but they may be creating certain kind of streamlined processes for certain types of ADUs. But to answer the exact question, detached ADUs can be up to 1,200 square feet and 16 feet high. So I'm guessing that what happened was that there was a certain permit that person was looking up that was not for the type of ADU that they wanted to build. Carlos, I think that I had a question for you while we're waiting for folks. If we could go back to your screen, I think it might be helpful to explain to folks how you filled out the rent portion of that to help them determine what the net equity was. So it looks like when you're doing that valuation, can you explain how you got that valuation number and then how you determine the net equity and what the significance of that is?
I can, and I will.
Thank you.
This is good, valuable info. Let's see. All right, can you all see this?
Is it just a plain Excel sheet?
Typing?
Yep.
Okay. I'm gonna do this real time with you all. So we get monthly income. And so let's say the monthly income is $2,000. That's your gross rental income. Gross rental income. All right. And then you deduct expenses. So let's say your expenses are $500 a month. So you put that here as a negative. Your expenses would include your insurance, your utilities, any kind of maintenance you have to do for the yard, for the property that's associated with the ADU. Even your own cost to go and collect the rent. So maybe it's $20 to walk to your yard that you want to charge, whatever. All your expenses go here, then you get your net rental income here. So then it's this plus that. So there's your net rental income, and then you annualize it. So this is times 12. So there's your what's called your annualized net operating income. That's how much money you have left to do stuff with. And then you divide it by your cap rate. So your cap rate is whatever in your market. A cap rate in Fresno is different than a cap rate in San Francisco. Cap rate is really a multiplier that gives you value. There's a lot of theory. You could look at cap rate on Google, but it's really the multiplier, the variable that you divide the amount by to get valuation. In San Francisco, it's somewhere between 3.5% to 4.5%, which is really aggressive. In Oakland right now, it's somewhere between 4.5% to 6%. In LA, it might be 5 to 6%. In Fresno, it might be 5.5 to 6.5, 7%. And I'll show you the difference here. So if you take this number, and I'm going to use Oakland, and you divide it by 0.05, then you get your valuation. And so there's the valuation of the property. 5% aggressive for an ADU, so I'm going to say 7% just to be a little bit conservative. Then we see the value drop. So the thing about the cap rate, it has a huge swing. So if this was 8%, that little swing drops it by about $40,000. And so it really is a function of the cap rate in your own community. And this does not include your mortgage payment. The cap rate assumes that your totally financing this yourself. But at the end of the day, that's how you determine the bank will determine valuation in this way. It's different from debt service coverage ratio that the bank will also use to determine whether or not you can afford to make the monthly payments. And there's a bunch of information behind that, that if you're going to get $2,000 a month and your bank is only going to charge you $1,000 a month for your loan, principal and interest, then your debt service coverage ratio is 2, because 2,000 divided by 1,000 should be 2. Should
I
be.
think, and another one I see sometimes is people will be building the ADU with the intention to move into it themselves and rent out the primary dwelling on the property, which gives you a different kind of math, right? And you'd figure out the rental income of the primary residence to
That's
see
right.
where you'd end up.
Yeah, and that's what you would work with the bank with, talk to the bank about, and we're establishing relationships with various banks throughout California with How to ADU, and the idea is to have all of this, the banks primed and ready to go. One of the biggest challenges in moving these forward is the appraisal process, because banks, in order to underwrite it, always have to figure out how to appraise the finished product. Because this is a new program, there's not a lot of banks that have a lot of comps. So that's where things get stuck. There's always this bottleneck. And so the banks that we're working with is we're trying to help them figure out how to appraise a final product that doesn't have a lot of comps out there.
And so the significance of the valuation, Carlos, well, first of all, for folks that might not, how would somebody find a cap rate if they don't know it in their area?
Google?
Google?
Yeah, you can Google on you can Google on the computer. Oakland cap rate.
Okay.
The World Wide Web.
Okay.
The thing
And
called
then
the internet.
the significance of the valuation is that you don't want to borrow more, then that's going to be the limit, that the bank is going to use that number to figure out how much they're going to loan you on that.
Yeah, they'll do 60% of total value for an investment property. So if the value is $2 million, then you're looking at a $120,000 loan as the high end on a 60% loan to value.
So the significance for that for folks as they go through that is that that's going to be a factor in determining, one of the factors in determining what kind of construction they're going to go for. For instance, in the 2 different prefab models, they might already like prefab. Their site is amenable to having any kind of delivery model. So they know that they can do a prefab and that they can do a detached unit on their yard. But if they're only approved for 200,000 or 150,000, they might have to go with the option at the top based on a shipping container, versus if they're approved, their valuation is closer to 500, so their LTV might allow them to afford a fancier model. So that's why it's important to go through that kind of rent calculation and knowing what the cap rate is. Your bank will provide it to you, but it's good to audit them.
Right. And if you look here, 60% is roughly $30,000, which means that the homeowner would only have to come up with about $18,000 in costs in their own cash. The rest would be financed, and there's clearly plenty of rent coming in subsequent to finishing construction relative to the amount of the bank loan. A bank loan on $30,000, even at 5%, is substantially less than $1,500. So the debt service coverage ratio is easily met with this type of product.
I have one more question for you. So can you scan out, because you had the valuation, can I see the other numbers that you have there? Oh, okay. I see. Oh, I think that was, I guess the other thing is people, so you're saying that when you figure out what your net is, you're not including the mortgage payment. But if somebody wants to find out if they're going to be able to cover their interest payments, they need to also figure that out. How do they figure that out?
They would, so going back to this sheet, let me share this one.
Yeah.
So get rid of this. So you go here, and then you would say, okay, well, let's get rid of this for a second. That doesn't matter. So this is our annualized net operating income, and let's say this is after your expenses. In fact, we'll just do it monthly. Your monthly income is this, and let's say your mortgage payment is $1,000. Then your net cash or net income, net income is your total rental total rental income, your net rental minus your mortgage payment. So you get $500 a month.
Right.
That's it. That's the final. This is what I can use now to apply against my mortgage.
Great.
My house.
And then how do people
buy my fine wines?
Yeah. And so I guess the other things that or people could, because there might be an adjustment in your property taxes or other incidentals. So you could, what other costs should people anticipate that might not be a monthly expense?
So expenses should include property tax prorated by month. Thank you for mentioning that. So if you have a $12,000 a month property tax and divided by 12, your monthly is $1,000, right? So prorated property taxes.
Okay, so that is included there in the expenses.
Yeah, you got utilities, accounting cost if you hire an accountant. You have any marketing, which is like advertising it. You have your maintenance. Missing maintenance, utilities, accounting, prorated property taxes. These are the main ones. Security, if you want to have a security camera or your home security system. But those are the primary ones. Maintenance, utilities, property taxes, and then your management fees.
Yeah. And I guess I'm glad you brought up management fees, because I think that this assumes that the cost would be different, and people should do the math based on whether or not they're going to do some sort of short-term rental versus a longer-term rental. So like the costs of advertising are going to be different, and the management time costs and what you're going to have to put in the unit would be different as well.
Yes.
No, that's a great exercise. Thank you for taking us through that. I think that I just had one more question for you while I had you here. Maybe could you explain what the different types of costs what affects the cost? You went through that calculator there, but in an individual site, let's say I pick a prefab unit, I think that there's still some cost swings that might be associated with that depending on my lot that I would want to investigate. What would those things that I'd want to investigate be?
Yeah, there's a lot of variables. I'll touch on some of them just to give an example. If you have a prefab unit that you're bringing into your home and your driveway is 5 feet wide and the prefab unit is 15 feet wide, then you're going to need a crane, and bringing it in by crane might cost you an extra $10,000. You may have a plumbing line running right down the middle of your yard, maybe a gas line, or maybe some overhead wires that run in front of your lot, or sometimes even in the middle of your backyard. Shutting those down and moving them temporarily while you drop in and crane your unit is an extra cost. If you have a tree that you have to remove in order to situate your unit, then that's an extra cost. If you have to do grading because you have a lot of contours in your property, and so maybe you have little hills or you have a bunch of gardens that you raised beds and you have to flatten all your yard, that's an extra cost. And so there's just a lot of different little things that that can be additional costs associated even with getting the unit in and grading it and putting it on the foundation. I've tried to capture the bulk of those in my expenses. Things like crane delivery, that's not captured in there. Things like adding extra water meters, if you're already beyond capacity of your water meter size, if it's a 5/8 inch water meter and you're going to need a 1-inch meter, then you might end up paying significant costs for upgrading your water meter. That's not in my assessment because those are anomalies. Those don't happen all that often.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Well, it's, I think this might be a good segue for how do people move from the sample sheet and some rough ideas about what different projects would cost to actually figuring out if they've got these wires hanging in front of their house or a line running through their backyard or what kind of foundation they need to pour on top of what they've already got.
Yeah, so the next step in moving forward is a site assessment. And site assessment includes a review of the site to figure out if it's which of these options is best. If you have a very small side yard, if you have power wires in front of your house, then the best option is probably going with stick build. If you have a nice big backyard but hard to access, then doing a stick build or standard construction in your backyard is probably a better option, or even a prefab that includes just building the walls and then assembling them in the backyard is a better option. On the other hand, if you have a nice big yard, nice accessible, nice flat yard, prefab is probably going to be a really good option for you to keep costs down. So site assessments allows us to look at all of that, figure out the size of your utilities, see if we think it's going to be required to upgrade those. And then we give you a cost assessment of what the fees will be for permits, what the fees will be for utilities, what the city permits and then utility permit fees, what the cost will be for the actual construction of the unit. And then we'd recommend an approach that's consistent with what the owner is looking for. Typically, we charge between $400 to $500 for that, but I think in cooperation with How to ADU, we're charging $200 for those for this limited time basis. Is that about right, Laura, or did I make any errors?
You give them an even deeper discount, so it was $250, but you're always the very
Laura said.
Yeah, I want to add that it's really hard, even in the context of the state trying to make it easier for people to build ADUs. Everything is pretty idiosyncratic in terms of an individual's wants and needs, what they're going to get approved for at their bank, what they're able to rent the unit for, and then what they're actually able to build it on site. I've talked to lots of folks through the How to ADU platform that try to navigate that themselves, and in the course of trying to do that, they lose time, they get frustrated, and they end up caught on some sort of small item that they didn't anticipate in the beginning. So being able to get that site assessment where you're able to work with somebody who's gone through the process before and knows what the potential hangups are is really helpful and saves you a lot of frustration and gets you to move the ball quicker.
Excellent. Well, folks, I just got a text that one of my job sites, they were wrapping it up and the police arrived to tell them to hurry up and wrap it up.
Oh dear.
You need to get in contact with them. No, Alameda County is not playing with shutting down construction sites.
No, they stay in place. Okay, well, Ryan, we'll let you kind of close that up then.
That's it. Yeah. Thanks for attending. We'll be sending a recording of the webinar around to everybody who registered. Thank you for sending in your questions, and thanks for letting us help with your ADU projects, everybody. I hope you got a lot out of today. We'll be sending around a copy of that sample report so that that's a resource that you've got. And yeah, I think always be trying to figure out what your next step is, because every project's different, and the only way forward is to break it down into little baby steps and take it away. Thank you, Laura and Carlos, for your expertise as always. And thank you, everybody, for coming and watching. Have a good one, guys.
Thank you.